Welcome to This Explainer. Maritime law often sounds incredibly dense and intimidating, but today we're translating it into a bright, breezy survival guide to the rules of the high seas. If you've ever looked at ocean law and thought it was nothing but dusty old textbooks, well, think again. We're going to visualize these fascinating regulations and make them super easy to understand at first glance. But before we even get into the day-to-day rules for the crew, picture this. You're right in the middle of the ocean, and the person in charge just steps down. Talk about a high-stakes relay race. The legal gymnastics required to make sure the ship doesn't immediately descend into total chaos are actually fascinating, and we're going to build up to exactly how that works. So, here's our agenda for today. First, rules of the high seas. Second, deserters and stowaways. Third, the spouse exception. Fourth, passing the captain's wheel. And finally, the ultimate penalty. All right, Section 1, Rules of the High Seas, a visual survival guide. There's a pretty stark contrast between the romantic idea of sailing and the reality. While maritime life seems endlessly adventurous, the wind, the sails, the open horizon, out there, vessels are actually governed by incredibly strict legal mandates. And there's a really good reason for that. When you're hundreds of miles from land, a ship is basically a self-contained little world. You absolutely need ironclad rules to ensure absolute safety and total accountability for every single person on board just to keep the whole thing afloat. Moving on to Section 2, Deserters and Stowaways, Regulating the Crew and Public. So there are two massive behavioral don'ts when it comes to the people on board. First up, Section 108. This strictly prohibits anyone from using any means whatever to persuade a crew member to neglect their duty or desert the vessel. Essentially, don't talk the crew into quitting their jobs mid-voyage. Then we've got Section 109, which flips the coin. This one makes it highly illegal to secrete yourself, which is just legal speak for stowing away, and going to sea without explicit official consent from the master, owner, or agent. To sum it up, don't convince people to leave and definitely do not sneak onto the ship. Okay, Section 3, the spouse exception, a surprisingly funny legal carve-out. But what happens if someone does actually desert? Well, under the second part of Section 108, the law doesn't just go after the deserter or the person who convinced them to leave. It actually targets anyone who gives them a place to hide. If you harbor or secrete a seafarer, and you know, or even just have a hunch, that they've willfully neglected their duty, you are breaking maritime law. The authorities want to make it virtually impossible for deserters to find a safe haven. Because, think about it, just one single missing crew member can deeply compromise the safety of the entire vessel. But, hidden right at the end of this incredibly strict mandate, there's this remarkably amusing exception. The law completely exempts the spouse of the deserter. Yep, you heard that right. If a sailor jumps ship and runs straight home, the law gives family loyalty a surprising legal pass. The authorities essentially shrug and go, look, we get it. It's your husband or wife. We aren't going to throw you in jail for letting them hide in the basement. It's this unexpectedly bright human moment baked right into the middle of some very heavy maritime law. All right, Section 4, Passing the Captain's Wheel, Leadership Rules Mid-Voyage. This brings us right back to that high-stakes question we asked at the very beginning of this explainer. Section 110 governs the intense relay race that happens if the master of an Indian vessel leaves command while a voyage is actually in progress. Whether they're removed, superseded, or they just outright quit, a ship simply can't exist in a leadership vacuum. There has to be a flawless transfer of power to a successor. To make sure that happens, the law mandates a strict three-step sequence to change masters mid-ocean. First, the predecessor, the old captain, must deliver custody of all the crucial documents regarding navigation and the seafarers. They can't just toss the keys and hop in a lifeboat. The paperwork has to be formally exchanged. Second, the successor has to officially log the receipt of those documents in the official logbook. And third, the predecessor must actually endorse that logbook entry. It's an airtight, triple-check system of accountability to ensure absolutely nothing gets lost in the handoff.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate penalty, Section 110 consequences.
So, what if the outgoing master drops the baton and doesn't lawfully hand over those crucial documents without a really good reason? Well, the penalty is severe. The Director General steps in and they have the power to completely suspend or even withdraw the Master's Certificate of Competency. That is basically their official license to sail and work at sea. So we're talking about a career-ending move. But the law isn't entirely ruthless. It rightfully protects the master by guaranteeing them a reasonable opportunity to be heard before any suspension is finalized. It's a pretty perfect balance of swift justice and fair procedure.
As we wrap up this explainer, it really leaves you marveling at the intricate, structured systems keeping our oceans orderly, doesn't it? It's not just about steering a boat, it's about navigating this massive web of legal responsibilities. So, I'll leave you with this to think about. After seeing how tightly controlled every single movement and document is out on the water, do you think you could handle the immense responsibility of taking the captain's wheel yourself?